I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
John and I have been hosting this show now for 3 months, and we're both clinical psychologists, and we really wanted to start this show because it seemed like the public, the media, even the political elites weren't recognizing Trump's cognitive decline. Certainly, they had acknowledged and seen how psychologically disturbed he was through his criminal behavior, his compulsive lying, his severe personality disorder that's called malignant narcissism, but they weren't noticing what was happening to his cognitive range. And John was really the first person to point this out. And we refer to it as early signs of dementia, as seen through his strange physical gait, his phonemic paraphasias when he begins a word he can't finish. But John and I have been noticing this overall reduction in complexity. So that when he's speaking at rallies, he's gumming ideas together. And we see it as a really dramatic decline since 2016 and even 2020. John?
And we're going to talk about that today. My takeaway is, hey guys, this is the debate. And I just have to say, today's show is all about victory. Victory, victory, and victory. The main victory, of course, is that Kamala Harris decimated Donald Trump, just as I thought she would. And she did it in all the right ways. And we're going to get into that in detail. And victory in another way, which is that the strategy that George Conway has suggested is working. And Kamala used it during the debate. And we'll be getting into that too, because she kicked him in the crowd size right after she shook his hand.
Oh, John, and she kicked him in the crowd size by shaking his hand.
Well, she did both. That's right. But then she commented on his puny crowd size as well. But just a little bit, like Obama. But lastly, it's also a victory because it's finally being reported in the press. And we're going to be talking about that as well. And finally, I do want to mention at the top of the show that we're very lucky today that we're going to be speaking to Kamala Harris's biographer, Dan Morain. So it's the perfect time to be speaking to him. He's written the book Kamala's Way. Well, we need him to help us see that how Kamala's way was being expressed during that debate. So let's do that. We are going to have maybe a longer show this week because we really want to get into this debate in detail. This is a historic debate. Many people have said Lawrence O'Donnell said this was the greatest debate performance he'd ever seen in his political career, which is quite a statement. It's certainly going to be one of the most impactful. I think that we are going to see that this debate was the definitive corner turning in the election.
Absolutely. And what's so extraordinary about 2024 is the last debate was also definitive.
Yes, we've really had two definitive debates. Just as dramatic. And that's never really the case. Rarely is that the case.
Yeah. Once in a while, Jimmy Carter and Reagan.
Once in a while.
That was huge. It changed everything. It's Kennedy, Nixon.
Yeah, Nixon sweating on camera.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, he lost. Yeah. I mean, Kennedy really did it. But I think what's kind of extraordinary for me, and we'll talk about this as we go on, which is that all of Trump's problems we saw cognitively in this debate were present in the last one. It's just that Biden's terrible night, his struggling to be clear and to be strong, masked Trump's vulnerabilities, even to himself, because he was telling everybody he was going to win this debate.
Well, and we're going to get into this, but he's also showed in this debate all of the signs of cognitive decline that we've been pointing to all along, but here they were flagrantly on display. But one of the things I want to start talking about, because your colleague and mine, Drew Weston, wrote a book called The Political Brain, in which he has the hypothesis that there's really one variable that matters in these kinds of political contests. One person is going to come off as dominant over the other one, and that is the person who will be elected. And the most important thing that happened in this debate is that Kamala established dominance over Donald Trump, something that we have not seen before. So some people have said that Kamala won this debate in the first 7 seconds. So let's see those 7 seconds.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
Nice to see you. Have fun.
Thank you.
So you see what she did there? She walked into his space because he was just standing there at the podium. She aggressively walked into his space, but then did the gracious, civilized thing, okay, and shook his hand. So she kind of went high and low at the same time. She said, I'm bigger and I'm tougher than you, and I'm going to take a dominant position over you, and I'm more civilized than you, and so I'm going to be a gracious, good sport.
And also, if you watch it carefully, she hesitates for a second and makes the decision to cross into the space. It wasn't planned. She was going to the podium. And I think by shaking his hand and saying, Kamala Harris, she's naming herself. It's like, say my name. I'm naming myself.
That's
how
point.
it starts.
I like that. Let's see a photo of the handshake, because that happened very quickly. I think that a body language expert would tell you that she is dominant over him in this picture.
Oh, yeah.
She seems confident. She's looking a little, I'm not sure what the word is, quizzical, but kind of a little bit like she's laughing at him, I guess. And he's kind of got his head down. He's not looking at her directly in the eyes. It's like he's kind of stooping his shoulders a little bit. I think this picture really is very important when you analyze politics in this very simian and simple way. She is establishing dominance over him, sort of beginning, middle, and end of story. Like with dogs, once they bare their neck, it's over. He's sort of already bowing a little bit to her. All right. Well, one of the things that I'm so happy about what Kamala is doing is she is doing a full Conway. She is adopting the strategy that I really credit Conway with developing, which is the ridicule him and basically trigger his insecurities and his rage in a way that forces him to start defending himself in a way that makes him seem off balance and unhinged. So after she shakes his hand, she kicks him in the crowd size. You see that one?
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so, that would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border?
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
A lot of people believe this is the moment when Kamala Harris won the presidency.
Yes.
Because he sounds stark, raving mad. You don't have to, it doesn't matter if you're a psychologist, because we care about what the voters think, okay? It sounds completely insane.
What I would also add, though, it's clumsy. He mentions World War III, and then the millions of these are all things we've heard from the rallies. I've watched most of the rallies. I've heard all of it before, but it's clumsy. He's taking a piece of it and a piece of this and a piece of that, and has stepped on his own point. And her response is extraordinary. She's pretending to be amazed by how crazy it is.
Well,
she's
it
modeling
actually is shockingly crazy.
No, I know, but she's studying.
She's modeling.
She's heard him do this before.
Yes.
She's modeling.
No, that's right. They prepared for her, and they were aware of the reality of the split screen. In other words, if she's looking like they used it so well, because as he's talking crazy, right? If she's looking like, what the hell are you talking about, man? Just with her facial expression, that is a rebuttal. It is a rebuttal. It's a visual rebuttal. And you're right about it being disorganized, because as crazy as that conspiracy theory is, he didn't actually invent that. I was actually going to have that in the show before the debate. This is this horrible rumor. No one even knows where it got started, but it was amplified by J.D. Vance and a bunch of Republicans in Congress and Elon Musk. Hundreds of millions of people saw this. This is blood libel. You know, this makes me really, really angry as a Jew. You know, Harry, you know that there used to be, from the Middle Ages, right, this myth that Jews use the blood of Christian babies for their Passover matzah. And so every year around Passover, there's a little pogrom against the Jews, you know, just to pay them back for the Christian babies they're not killing. And so when you start spreading this kind of blood libel about an ethnic group, you're really setting them up to be the objects of violence. But what you're saying about his gumming things together, it's so a little bit like when Biden said, I killed Medicare, right? I saved Medicare, or I beat Medicare, right? There was actually an idea behind it, okay? But here, it's a really racist, disgusting rumor that's been circulating around the internet. But because most people, okay, don't like live on Twitter the way I do, most people had not heard about the crazy racist trope. And because he came out with it in such a disorganized way, it sounded like I beat Medicare, except it sounds like they're eating dogs and cats with no context, with no explanation. So it sounded even more crazy than it was because of his cognitive decline. So he's presenting a crazy racist idea that's been circulating on the rumor mill, on the conspiracy, right-wing conspiracy mill. But because he's so cognitively broken down, he presents it in a way that makes it seem even more nuts than it is.
But just one quick point, which is that we have watched on this show, if you've watched our previous episodes, that when Trump is being interviewed by people who love him and believe his lies, in what Nicole Wallace called Earth 2, if he's not emotionally agitated, he's in much more rhetorical control. He can speak much more in a more organized way. But she got to him. And when he got agitated and aroused, and because his cognitive abilities were declining, what happened was it became mangled. Like, they're eating babies and they're eating pets and you're doing this. And she just is sitting there just.
And that was the strategy. That was the play. This was in the playbook. Okay.
Right.
The kicking him in the crowd size thing. I'm not really using that as a real metaphor. The point was that she took a punch. She punched him right in his narcissistic vulnerability, knowing that would produce the very reaction that you just described. And it worked.
Right. And again, I just lectured my students, so I'm into mechanisms, but you insult him in a way that's so important to him. The rallies are the only thing that makes his life worth living.
Right.
You attack that makes him feel wounded and embarrassed and humiliated. It raises his agitation and there's rage that comes up. And then he has to mobilize a response in real time while being watched by 65 million people. So it comes out mangled and forced, almost pressured, because he's struggling to respond while being overwhelmed by his feelings. And by the way, that's what happens when people start to suffer cognitive decline. It also happens when people have personality disorders, and he has both.
That's right. And so we know that we know what the cause and effect is going to be. Well, so she also pressed her advantage, again, pointing out his cognitive deficits.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did in fact lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact. That's deeply troubling, and the American people deserve better.
We couldn't have said it better ourselves.
No.
Yeah.
You know, this is a woman of an incredible intelligence and eloquence and charisma. As I said last week, when Biden, in a very gracious and generous way, stepped down, who knew that this was the moment for Kamala Harris, that it all came together for her? And on that stage, you cannot make that stuff up. Now, she prepared it. I think she prepared so many things. But just because you prepare something doesn't mean you can deliver it.
Well, and I think part of Kamala's way, and we'll hear from her biographer if I'm right, is that she's someone who believes in being prepared. Do you know that she prepared for 5 days in a hotel?
I can see it.
That's right. You can see it, right? But the point is that's the way to do it. You know, she overlearned and overlearned and overlearned those comments so that she could say them fluidly. That's how you do it. I know from my own interviews, and if you look at me and #unfit, okay, or #untruth, you probably think I'm an incredibly articulate person. But that's because I wrote those lines and I practiced them 100 times before I said them, trying to sound natural. Okay. Now you guys get to hear me stumble and bumble and interrupt myself and lose words and laugh in the middle inappropriately. So, I'm not really like that guy in the movie. But the point is she took the time and she put in the work, right, to put in that performance. And I think that's important to acknowledge.
And again, just to talk about a mechanism, a professional actor learns his or her lines. And when you really know the lines, you can then be spontaneous with them on stage. So she learned them so well that she could bring them up spontaneously. And spontaneity is the hallmark of authenticity, and it's the only way to connect with an audience. You have to be spontaneous or they fall asleep. Trust me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you would know, because he's had a lot of sleeping audiences, folks. He's learned the hard way. All right. Well, one of the things that we've been talking about as a theme is that Donald Trump has always been an inveterate liar, but his lies are becoming more chaotic and fantastical and sort of so transparently impossible to believe and false. There's a deterioration. In other words, he's always been a liar. He's always willing to tell a lie, but now as his cognition is deteriorating, the lies seem more disorganized and extreme and confused and unbelievable. So a lot of these lies, Harry, we've heard before. A lot of the lies that came up in the debate, the crazy lies, the fantastical lies, were most of them are ones we'd heard before in his rallies, but most Americans don't go to his rallies or even live on Twitter and look at the clips of his rallies. So these crazy, crazy ideas were being introduced to America in some ways for the first time. And so I think that the fact that he took his greatest hits from his rallies, the most fantastical lies that he tells, and make up greatest hits medley out of them, really, really hurt him. So let's start with the first unbelievable lie.
They have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because
they'll execute the baby.
He's been saying this for a while.
I know. But who isn't out of their mind or in the cult would ever even believe that for a second? And while we're saying that, one of the things that was great about this debate, and was very, very important, was that these moderators did a great job of fact-checking. Unlike the CNN debate, where actually it was in the rules that they not fact-check. It was actually part of the rules. I thought that was true in this case, but I guess I was wrong. Let's hear what they say about killing the baby.
And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact.
So, boom, he's fact-checked right there. And I think that was very, very important. And thank God, look, that is part of your job, press. And thank you. They did a good job.
They did.
So let's talk about Roe v. Wade. Of course, famously, that was the question that Biden blew. But when it really is a question that's incredibly strong for our side. Well, Kamala, you talk about being genuine. I'm sure, she rehearsed this speech, but maybe because it's really coming from the heart, right? And maybe in part because she is a woman. Here's what she has to say about Roe v. Wade.
To agree, the government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban.
It's just very powerful.
Well, a really good prosecutor builds a case, has a rapport with the jury, and in the closing statements, pulls it all together. And if they're effective, they have to believe it, and they have to feel it, and they have to evoke emotions in the jury. And that's what she was doing. She built the case with examples, vivid examples.
Now, by contrast, Trump, and this is part of, again, this is where he's executing his old plays, but in a gummed up way. He's always talked out of both sides of his mouth. He's always been actually very good at that. He's almost a ventriloquist, frankly. I'm for it, but I'm against it. I was always against it, but I was for it. We know that he's, responsible for getting rid of Roe v. Wade. He's bragged about it. And we all watched him, appoint 3 right-wing operatives to the Supreme Court who made it happen. So that's his position. That's his base. That's his position. But lately, he's been realizing that that's hurting him in the polls. So he's just decided to start announcing he's the pro-choice president. And that he actually is supporting women's reproductive freedom, as if we're not going to notice that little switcheroo. And so now he's in this position where he doesn't want to say he would veto a national abortion ban. He doesn't want to say he wouldn't veto it. So here's what he says when he's asked directly. He's actually asked twice. This is the second time.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. In all fairness, J.D., and I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. Look.
The honeymooners. No, I get it.
Thanks, Harry. No, he's just peddling, because he doesn't want to be take a position either way. All right. So talk about the crazy lies. One of the crazy lies that has been on his, best hits, but I think did not play well on the national stage is this idea that, I mean, of course, he keeps saying all the criminal, and this is one place where I would wish that Kamala had done one thing slightly differently, and that the Democrats would do one thing slightly differently. We're not in a competition as to who can be tougher at the border. I think somehow we've let the border crisis be reduced to that. I think there's also an important need. I mean, Ronald Reagan was very good at this, to remember that immigration is a good thing. Okay. And that we love immigrants. Okay. And that we're children of immigrants, and that we're a nation of immigrants. And it's in the poem on the Statue of Liberty. It's our identity. It's our strength. Okay. It's not something that we should suddenly accept is a demonic or threatening foreign invading force. It's actually our lifeblood. Okay. And Reagan used to talk about that, all the suffering people seeing the light on the hill and, coming home to one thing about Reagan, I know I'm going to get nasty comments about this because his policies were terrible and they had terrible results. I believe Reagan loved America. I do. And I believe Reagan was actually a caring person.
He did immigration reform. He made an incredible deal to let people in on guest visas. I mean, he was all for that.
He was very pro-immigrant. Let's just leave it at that. He was very pro-immigrant. And so I think, why don't we, instead of just trying to show we're tough at the border, why don't we also show that? I mean, I think this came out more at the convention because of also Kamala's mother is an immigrant. But I just wish we would take the high ground on immigration. But Trump's, of course, saying all the immigrants are criminals, blah, blah, blah. But listen to this nutty claim that crime is going down all over the world. All over the world, crime rates are going down. And why? Because they're massively exporting all their criminals here.
How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah, it is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country. And they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down? You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country.
If a third grader had to do a report, chief import into the United States, criminals, we're actually cornering the market. We're importing so many criminals that there's a criminal shortage.
Yeah, they're taking all the criminals and putting them on planes and flying them into Mexico and then escorting. I mean, it makes no sense if you think about it.
It makes no sense even if you don't think about it.
Because it's vile. It's just appealing to the paranoid response of Americans who don't want to feel invaded.
Right.
That's what he's doing.
Exactly. Now, one of the things we've been talking about is that the fact that they keep blaming the Democrats for the assassination attempt is in itself stochastic terrorism, because it naturally elicits the response in the listener of they're trying to kill our guy. Well, we'll show them. We'll get their guy or gal. And so it really is very, very dangerous. And he went there during the debate.
President.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized.
Lot to get to. Lindsay?
Notice he said that one.
Again, they're the threat to democracy.
But that one is a way of talking about an African American or a person of color. It's code.
Yeah. And you brought that up last week. So now let's hear Kamala's discussion of the rule of law.
They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would.
One of the things I think about is I tried to group these actually mostly chronologically, but also by topic. She's winning on every topic. She's, you want to talk about abortion? She's talking about women bleeding out in the parking lot. He's going humana, humana, humana. You want to talk about rule of law? Oh, those cases against me in Russia, Russia, Russia. And she's going, he's going to terminate the Constitution. He's a criminal. So at every point, she is really winning every round.
I agree.
So, one of the things that I want to point out here is, Bill Maher, the comedian, one of the things that he says about Donald Trump, that he says, like, over and over again, he actually likes the audience to repeat it after him, that Donald Trump is a whiny little bitch. And I just want to show you a whiny little bitch moment, if I may.
She was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out. Wait a minute, I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? She went out.
I'm talking. She wasn't interrupting him. I think you heard a little something. I guess she did say something, but I couldn't even hear what it was. And he just looks like, I don't know, just a little prima donna. Stop interrupting me. I'm talking.
Well, he's also referring to her saying that to Pence.
And he's mocking the fact that when she said that, when she was actually being interrupted and was reclaiming her time. So he obviously had stored up that line, but it really lands with a thud.
It landed nowhere. No, it was so incompetent.
Now, here's something that I really enjoyed. Donald Trump's attempt to walk away from January 6th. Right?
Oh, yes.
Because really, he really had nothing to do with it, actually.
But let me just ask
you. You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes, sir.
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big.
I hate it when that happens. All right. Someone just invites me to give a speech. I give a speech, and then it turns out that they try to overthrow a government and blame it on me. I hate it when that happens,
Yeah, it's terrible.
I mean, the term that keeps coming to my mind, and I think it's a term that people used to use and they don't use it anymore. We need to bring it back. You're insulting my intelligence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you must think I'm an idiot, right? And you're insulting me by behaving as if you think I'm really that dumb. I mean, who's going to believe that he just was invited to give a speech? That's just ridiculous.
Oh my God.
Let's hear a little more about what he has to say about January 6th.
Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But
no one on their side was killed. So he's not on the side of the police. It's just their side.
Yeah. No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's just so disgusting. But there's his real thought.
But it's out there in the open, is what you're saying.
Those are his troops.
Right. These are my shock troops. It's Donald Trump against America.
Right. Ashley Babbitt was one of his brown shirts who was killed breaking into the Capitol, and how terrible. That was a disgrace, he said.
Yeah. I have to say, I mean, there are some ways in which I know people say over again, like, how can people be so dumb? And, but some of the things that make me feel that way is, how can somebody be running for president who violently tried to overthrow the government? I mean, it really is like Hitler and the beer hall push. I mean, that's just an incredible. And why can someone who's been shown to be working with our mortal enemy, Russia, be running for president? So these two things, I mean, you talk about disqualifying, never mind the fact that he's a liar and a felon and a rapist. I mean, if you're betraying the country in the most fundamental way by trying to destroy the Constitution and ally yourself with our mortal military enemy, I mean, what worse could he do? Right? I mean, I can't think of anything.
That's what we're trying to prevent.
That's what, yes, exactly.
Because he can do more.
Because yes, of course. Now that's his version of January 6th. Let's hear Kamala's narrative and hear who's more convincing.
It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason.
I mean, talk about prosecuting the case. He's, lying through his ass in a way that's just completely ridiculous. And she's saying, I was there, and this is what happened.
No, it's devastating. You can't answer it.
It's unanswerable. I mean, it's just like, if this were a prize fight, I'm just saying right now it's like 10-0, Of course, the other issue is race. Let's hear how badly he handles it and how well she handles it.
I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something, I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this.
I mean, it's like Beauty and the Beast.
It's incredible, isn't it? And remember, in the interview with Dana Bash, really tried to get her to talk about race, and Kamala would have none of it. She said, "I want to be a president to all the people." But this was the moment.
Yeah.
where she decided, but notice he first said, I want to be the president for everyone. But this guy on my right is a racist and has been a racist his entire life.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
he agrees it.
Yeah.
How can you answer that?
Yeah. No, it's just another slam dunk, so another round to her.
And he had such a, all Trump had to do was say, the comments I made were misinterpreted. I have great respect for Kamala Harris and her race doesn't matter. That's all he had to say.
Look, Harry, if you want to be a Jew, be a Jew. I don't care. I don't care. But it's just all of a sudden now you're saying you're a Jew. Before you didn't talk about being a Jew. Now you're saying, look, whatever you want to be, whatever you want to be. I don't want to be a Jew. You don't want to be a Jew. It's okay with me.
Yes, before I was Harry Lewis, and now I'm Harry.
And he changed his name to Segal because he wanted not. All right. Well, anyway, what's the other thing as I said, he is a traitor. I know Harry doesn't exactly agree with me. I actually believe he's a Russian agent. If he's not a Russian agent, I would just like someone to explain to me how he would behave differently if he was. But we know he's doing Putin's bidding. We know he's on Putin's side. We know that he wants Putin to win the war in Ukraine. And that if he were president, he would make that happen very quickly. So here's how he answers a very direct question. Do you want Ukraine to win the war?
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for 250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left. I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of negotiation. Well, it wasn't, because Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III. Don't kid yourself, David. We're playing with World War III, and we have a president that we don't even know if where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
Your time is up. Just to clarify in the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris.
Because we know he cares so much about human lives being destroyed, like the hundreds of thousands of people he killed, Americans he killed with COVID. It's right there in plain sight. He's saying, yeah, he could end the war very quickly. He said he would end it before he even became president, because all he has to do is pick up the phone and say to Zelensky, "You're cooked. It's over."
But notice that this was a better organized response. In other words, you could follow it. There weren't too many digressions. There were some, but not too many. Mm-hmm. It ends with these vicious comments about Biden not really being president, not really being alive. Later, he says to her, I think, Biden hates you, which is completely made up from Trump. But I think when there's something about a plan he has and a grandiose idea he has, he was able to express it without becoming disorganized. Not many times in the debate did you see that, but you saw it there, which is what frightens me even more about him. Mm-hmm. He knows what he wants to do to NATO. He knows what he wants to do with Putin.
Yeah, and actually, you've come up with this sort of more psychodynamic view that some things make him more organized, some make him more disorganized. He's very organized around his worship and collaboration with Putin.
Oh yeah, you're right.
He's on that team. He feels powerful. Right. He's borrowed his strength. He idealizes Putin. Later, we talks about idealizing Viktor Orban, who is Putin's puppet. Because after all, look, it's a very simple thing. This is an attempt by a group of gangs to take over the world, right? It's like what we had in New York, the 5 families, divided up the city. They're trying to divide up the world, and so it's just that's what I keep trying to say. Trump is just the American subsidiary of Gangster Inc., and Putin is just the head of it. But so I think that's just really important for people to see that his treason. But we know that already. Okay, on to more crazy stuff. On to more stuff that millions and millions.
But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. That's right. Now, how much would you pay? We'll throw in another insane delusion. Now, how much would you pay? This one chops and dices thoughts and chops them up into word salad. It slices and dices the ideas until they're word salad. Now, how much would you pay? All right. Here's another crazyism.
Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison.
That's her platform. She wants to do transgender operations on illegal immigrants in prison. I'm sorry, I just have to laugh.
Because we know there's lots of transsexual operations going on.
Yeah, the demand is really, first of all, there's a lot of demand. He just took all the things he hates the most and put them all together, gummed them together, as you say.
He's thinking about Johnny Cash's song, A Boy Named Sue, and he's getting it backwards.
Right, because when you're in prison, the one thing you want to do is be an advocate for your transsexual operation, because I'm sure people will be very, very woke. They're very woke in prison. Okay, I'm sorry, it's just too ridiculous. Now, this next clip, I want to prepare you. It's a little bit different than the other clips I showed you because it's awkwardly filmed on somebody's cell phone in a bar. But it's a scene from the debate. Now, you might wonder, why am I doing that? Okay, well, the reason I'm doing that is because in the debate, we had no audience, right? And there's a line here that I'd like you to hear with an audience reaction.
Get this, they'll get this. And the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president
Hear that audience reaction? Because she delivered that line beautifully, right? In that hesitate, this, and your mind filled in, piece of shit.
Exactly, right.
Let's face it. Come on. Everyone's thought bubble was piece of shit or something to that effect, right? And then you go, former president. So it's just another way of owning him. She just keeps owning him over and over again,
She does. It's amazing.
And lastly, actually, this was a line I know that you really wanted us to include here, and I think it's a good place to end, where she calls him a disgrace.
And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on national security, including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
You're a disgrace.
You know, we mentioned this at the top of the show, but I've seen every debate that Trump had, including in the primaries in 2015. I have never seen anyone take him down.
Yeah.
And that's because even if a journalist is being very aggressive, it's a couple of questions. They're not going to take him down in 60 minutes. But she beat the crap out of him.
She really did.
Over and over again. And she did it while appearing presidential, while being humorous, while having a certain distance. And then she would go in for the kill like that.
That's right. She managed to go high and low at the same time.
Yeah.
She did it.
And it's funny because Michelle Obama, who famously said, when they go low, we go high.
Yeah.
Michelle went low and high at the convention. So they were all ready. So did Obama. They were all ready.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to get to Obama's crowd size thing. I know you've seen it before. We're going to see it again because Kamala's using it. The other thing I want to point out is when she's calling him a disgrace, he's not looking at her. He's like looking away, which again, in terms of the body language, shows her dominance over him, right? Even though we talk about how he lashes back, actually, he's kind of taking it there. And one of the things that you notice in the debate, during the entire debate, he does not make eye contact with her.
No, he really avoids it. And he's so rattled and he can't find his bearing. And when he does have a moment of organized speech like he did about NATO, there's something so rageful about it.
Yes.
There's no playfulness. There's no hope. There's just, you guys are destroying the world and only I can stop it.
Yeah. No, I mean, people have frequently described him as like the angry, demented uncle that you try to avoid at a family gathering who's ranting about this, that, and that really is, how he comes across. But I think that it's really important for people to understand because she kept looking at him. She kept turning to him, accusing him, pointing at him, and he's not looking at her. And in terms of the fundamentals of dominance and submission, if you knew nothing else, if you turned the sound off for the debate, right. You would know that she won.
Exactly.
Because she's looking at him contemptuously, quizzically, mockingly, and he can't look her in the eye. That I think even because look, we just played all these tapes. You've heard all this verbiage, all these words. Forget every word you heard in this last 50 minutes and just think about the image of him not being able to look at her and her looking at him and pointing.
Yeah.
So she won. Yay, we're saved. So a couple of things post-debate results I wanted to discuss. One, of course, is the Taylor Swift endorsement, which came so well-timed and so cleverly right after the debate. And the way that she did the endorsement was a real, I just have to say it, fuck you to JD Vance. And let's see some of that.
Endorsement of Harris and Waltz right after. She has 283 million followers on Instagram, and I'm sure that someone brought to your attention that she signed it "childless cat lady." This is a phrase that you are going to hear in your dreams and your nightmares probably for many years to come. How do you speak to women voters who obviously they care about what she thinks?
Of course. Well, look, we admire Taylor Swift's music, but I don't think most Americans, whether they like her music or fans of hers or not, are going to be influenced by a billionaire celebrity who I think is fundamentally disconnected from the interests and the problems of most Americans. Look, when grocery prices go up by 20%, it hurts most Americans. It doesn't hurt Taylor Swift. When housing prices become unaffordable, it doesn't affect Taylor Swift or any other billionaire. It does affect middle-class Americans all over our country. And so
it's really funny to hear JD Vance talking about Taylor Swift as a billionaire who's out of touch with the mainstream. She only has 300 million followers, so she's so out of touch.
It's so nuts. And you know what happened was she on that endorsement, she has a link for people to register to vote.
Yes.
I think 300,000 people registered to vote within the first hour.
Mm.
And let's also not forget that Kamala has earned $45 million in contributions since the debate.
Yeah.
It's a groundswell.
It's a groundswell. And here's the coup de grace. Here's the lights out moment. And then we'll move on from the debate. Some of you may not know, but Frank Luntz is the GOP pollster. He has been for decades.
And strategist.
Here's what he had to say about the debate.
Do you think Kamala won? And does that mean she may now win the election?
I think more accurately, it's that Donald Trump lost. And this is not the worst debate performance I've seen in my career, but it's very close to it. The conversations about people eating dogs and cats, calling the leader of Hungary one of the greatest world leaders, repeatedly missing the opportunity to focus on inflation and affordability, and the complete inability to present his point of view without completely tearing into Joe Biden, into whomever was in his sights. It was a pretty negative performance, pretty pessimistic, cynical, contemptuous, and I think that this will cost him. Yes, I'm trying to decide if I want to go on record, and the answer is yes. I think that he loses because of this debate performance.
Wow.
Absolutely. And Luntz is one of those people who he doesn't say things that he doesn't believe in. He just doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
And
he didn't want to say it. He said, should I say it? And finally, yeah, I do want to say it. Yeah.
No. I think anyone, it doesn't matter whether you're partisan or not. Anyone who thinks about politics and saw that, look, when I saw Biden stumble terribly, in my heart, the election was over. Yeah. He was never going to recover from that, even though he didn't deserve to.
Yeah.
He's a very good president. He was fantastic with NATO. He did great in press conferences, but it was done. And he knew it, and he graciously stepped down. And now she's done it to Trump. And no one has done it to Trump until now.
It's really extraordinary. We've lived through two of the most impactful debates in 100 years of American history in the last 2 months.
That's true.
It's really extraordinary.
Amazing.
So look, one of the things that we've been doing on this show is documenting Trump's cognitive decline and documenting the press's ignorance of it. They're not ignorant, but they are had been ignoring it. So obviously the debate was the big headline. So we started with that, but there was a week of events with Trump before the debate. And I cut a lot of this material out, obviously, because we had so much to talk about with the debate. But I just want to point out that at every appearance Donald Trump made last week, he evidenced his dementia.
Oh, yeah.
In a significant way. And as we're going to see, the press is now starting to comment on it. So number one, he does this softball town hall with Hannity, right? And once again, he doesn't know who he's running against. He just doesn't know.
I can't imagine New Hampshire voting for him. Anybody in New Hampshire, because they're watching right now, but anybody in New Hampshire that votes for Biden and Kamala, I really think I call her.
I can't believe anyone would vote for him. I mean, anyone who votes for Biden and Kamala have their head.
No, he remembered Kamala. And then he was pivoting to Kamala, but he didn't remember it when he said, how could anyone vote for Biden? So we're watching that switch happen, right?
Well, he said Biden and Kamala, so as if they were a ticket. So the Biden-Kamala ticket.
And then you see him pivoting to talking about her because it reminded him it's actually her she's running against and not Biden.
Well, anyway, we might want to hear more of the tape. I'm not sure he did recover, but the point is that this is part of a pattern. He thought he was running against Obama for the last few years. Now, he's always one president behind.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just being more nuanced, which is he forgot who he was running against and sort of remembered after he said it and then was fixing it. He does that all the time. He makes mistakes and then he tries to cover them.
Yeah, no, he does. I'm just not sure he did in this case, but it's not that important. We don't have to go back and argue about it. But the point's made either way. This last gaffe, call it a gaffe, this went viral. Everybody paid attention to this. Everybody in the press. At the New York Club for Growth, he tries to answer a question about what is he going to do about childcare. We're going to show a video of him, but it also the people who made this video also have a transcript that is running contemporaneously with his speech or on the other screen. Because one of the things that I wish people would do more often is read the verbatims of the what he says, because the thought disorder is so much more apparent. It's a little bit like, I don't know, have you ever used like AI transcripts? You know, they're rough, you know, and they seem so, you know, no one would talk that way. They sound disordered. The real 100% correct transcripts sound like AI transcripts. Do you know what I mean? They're gumming together, as you say, phrases. And so I think it's actually helpful to read along, those of you who are watching, while we listen along.
You commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable. Specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. You know, I was we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time, coupled with the reductions that I told you about on waste and fraud and all of the other things that are going on in our country. Because I have to stay with childcare. I want to stay with childcare, but those numbers are small relative to the kind of economic numbers that I'm talking about, including growth, but growth also headed up by what the plan is that I just told you about. We're going to be taking in trillions of dollars, and as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kind of numbers we'll be taking in. We're going to make this into an incredible country that can afford to take care of its people, and then we'll worry about the rest of the world. Let's help other people. But we're going to take care of our country first. This is about America first. It's about make America great again. We have to do it because right now we're a failing nation. So we'll take care of it. Thank you. Very good question. Thank you.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that's a psychopac, anti-psychopac ad.
Hey, I love the clarinet.
I do too.
Reminds me of the chickens laughing.
Yes. Well, you know, there's a theme here. It's called mocking, right? And we're discovering that it works.
It does. Thank goodness.
All right. So where are we here? Oh, I'm sorry. The last stop of the week that I wanted to discuss from last week, and this is a very quick clip. We had more from the Wisconsin rally, but we cut it down. We talked about how his lies are becoming more insane and just simply more unbelievable and fantastical. Let's hear another one.
Can you imagine you're a parent and your son leaves the house and you say, Jimmy, I love you so much. Go have a good day in school. And your son comes back with a brutal operation. Can you even imagine this? What the hell is wrong with our country?
Billy goes to school and then you pick him up at the bus and Jesus, now he's a girl. Wait, when did this happen? Who gave permission? I mean, that's crazy.
He's been doing this all spring and summer.
Yeah.
He takes something that has a little bit of truth in it and then just blows it up in these crazy ways. And you're right, John. It's not just that the lies are more crazy; it's they're less competent.
Mm-hmm.
They're seen through in a moment. They're just an idea. He has an idea and he says it. They're not planned lies.
Yeah,
They're spontaneous lies that make no sense. After the debate in the spin room, you know what he did? He said, the polls have come in. I won by 90 to 7. And there's another poll at 86 to 3. And then another one at 60, another one at 70. There were no polls yet. He's saying this in a spin room of professional politicians.
Right.
And that's that kind of, it's a kind of impulsive, it's unmediated. It's just, I won the polls. It's here it is. Here are the numbers. There's 10 different numbers.
Right.
And that's his dementia.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I said at the top of the show, I wanted to celebrate 3 victories. The first and most important one is Kamala's, because that's the victory that's going to save the world. Okay. The other victory, though, is after 9 years of banging on the door of the New York Times. And I have to say, you know, Harry, you and I grew up in New York City. I remember that my dad bought the paper New York Times every single day. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's a ritual, especially on Sundays, but every day, you know, to sit around with coffee and read the paper more or less cover to cover. And so I'm 66 years old. I've been doing that now my adult life, although now we don't have newspaper on newsprint anymore. And so I'm doing what everyone else does, which is sort of doom scrolling for 10 minutes on the New York Times, as opposed to the old ritual where, you know, you took out all the sections, you know. I kind of miss that, actually. But in my household, something wasn't true until it was published in the New York Times. That, you know, we believed in the New York Times as the paper of record. I think we kind of over idealized it now. And I think the New York Times has kind of gone bad in certain ways that I don't completely understand. They're very anti-Clinton. And but what I was going to say is we've been knocking on the door. Yes, we've gotten lots of publicity. I'm not trying to say we haven't gotten enough publicity, but we've been trying to break through to the voices that matter and that have authority, right? So we've been banging on the door of the New York Times. Specifically, I've been banging on the door of Peter Baker and Susan Glazer, his wife, for 9 years. I mean, I know these people. We correspond. Okay. So it's not like they don't know about the story. They don't know about us. They don't know about the issues. They know. But they've never, ever, ever reported on it until the day of the debate, the morning of the debate. This is really interesting. Before the debate itself, here's an article from Peter Baker, the most senior White House correspondent for the New York Times. We don't have time to go through the whole article, but I'm just going to show you a couple of sections. As the debate looms, Trump is now the one facing questions about age and capacity. With President Biden no longer in the race, former President Donald J. Trump would be the oldest person ever to serve in the Oval Office, but his rambling, sometimes incoherent public statements have stirred concern among others. Let's see that first quote. At 78, former President Donald J. Trump exhibits more energy and speaks with more volume than President Biden does at 81. But he too has mixed up names, confused facts, and stumbled over his points. Mr. Trump's rambling speeches, sometimes incoherent statements, and extreme outbursts have raised questions about his own cognitive health and, according to the polls, stimulated doubts among a majority of voters. So it's finally in the paper of record that his cognitive health is being questioned.
And it helped that Biden dropped out, because Biden's struggles that were much more about normal aging was keeping us from the media from showing Trump's, which was much more dangerous and extensive.
Yeah. No, and the other thing I think that has broken the story is that Kamala Harris and her campaign have been openly talking about his cognitive dysfunction. Right. So that gives the New York Times and other newspapers permission to talk about it. They're not talking about it because, you know, those wacky doctors on Shrinking Trump have invoked their authority to tell us that he has dementia. If that would have worked, it would have worked already. But it didn't. Okay. But now that the campaign has made these official talking points, it gives the New York Times permission to say, well, does he have cognitive decline? Because that's what the Harris campaign is saying. So the Harris campaign's being so aggressive, right, and going there and taking it to him is having all of these positive ripples. It means she kicks his ass in the debate. It means that the earned media is echoing her themes. And so they're beating him along with her. Okay, so he's getting drubbed, right? Not just from her, but from the press.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, the other victory that I want to crow about today and celebrate is that the PSYOP that George Conway came up with is working. Right? We talked about that at the top, but I just want to show a couple of some of these commercials, a couple more, that are going to be beamed into Mar-a-Lago that are, again, aimed at doing exactly what she did in the debate when she kicked him in the crowd size. So this next one is by the Anti-Psycho PAC. And as you may hear, if you recognize his voice, it's narrated by George Conway. And that's significant for two reasons. One, because he's a good narrator. But also, remember, Donald Trump knows George Conway personally. He's not the coffee boy. He's the ex-husband of his former campaign manager. So this is what Donald Trump is going to see in the lobby of Mar-a-Lago this weekend, hopefully.
Hey, Donald.
Governor Chris Sununu called Trump crazy, but
all your friends, all the people that have worked with you.
He's a very, very flawed man.
They all think you're nuts.
The man cannot tell the truth, but he combines it with being a narcissist.
He's a populist, authoritarian narcissist.
Donald Trump is not fit to be president of the United States.
Our country can't be a therapy session for a troubled man like
Governor Sununu called Trump crazy and said if he was in a mental institution, he wouldn't get out.
Turn over the nuclear codes of the United States to an erratic individual.
Serious character issues.
He constantly engages in reckless conduct.
Goes and he starts to say these wacky things.
But he's not fit to be president of the United States.
A consummate narcissist.
A narcissist at a level I don't think this country's ever
Donald
seen.
Trump's literally insane. And I think people are scared of him, and they should be scared of him.
Wholly unfit to be president of the United States in every way you can think of.
Learn more at psychopac.org. Anti-Psychopath PAC Inc. is responsible for the content of this advertising.
For those of you who are just listening, part of the great visual aspect is all those people who are saying he's bad, his former advisors, their heads are circling around his head. So he's looking like into the camera, looking distressed. And that basically he's being circled by all these voices of people who he used to work with telling him how bad he is.
I know, but let's just remember that most of them are voting for Trump. Barr, Nikki Haley, Lindsey Graham, Sununu, they're all voting for him, even though they say these things.
No, it's reprehensible. The thing I like about the ad is it's clearly calculated to stimulate his paranoia. Right? It's like we know he's paranoid, and when he gets paranoid, he turns on the people who are supposedly his allies because he distrusts them. Like one of the things that really caught my ear is when J.D. Vance said that Donald Trump reminds him 3 times a day that he used to say he was a never Trump guy. He never forgives people who diss him, even when they submit to him. In fact, after they submit to him, then he likes to humiliate them.
Right.
Right.
That's the goal anyway.
Yeah, that's the goal. So I love that paranoid ad. And let's see that now here's an ad being put out by Kamala HQ. So this is an official campaign ad invoking once again, kicking him in the crowd size.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems.
Oh, she had a big crowd. Oh, the crowd.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes. It just goes on and on and on. America's ready for a new chapter. We are ready for a President Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
That Obama bit with the crowd size was from the convention. Of course, it was priceless, but I love the way the Kamala campaign is using it, right?
No. I mean, when are they going to make a mistake? That was a perfect ad.
They're going to make a mistake.
Perfect ad.
I know. We're so used to making fun of people for not doing well, but they're doing great. So what can we say except, bravo. Yeah. All right. Well, we're finally up to the interview section of our show. I know we had a lot to cover today. Thank you, people, for sticking with us. So I'd like to introduce our author. Let's see the cover of his book, Kamala's Way, An American Life by Dan Morain. Well, Dan, I think we're incredibly lucky to have you today because, of course, we just experienced one of the most historically impactful debates in American history. As someone who's a biographer, I'm a biographer. I wrote a biography of Bill Clinton. I know what it feels like to be a biographer and to see your principle, in action, and to say, boy, now people are seeing what I knew about that person. Yeah. Did you have any of those moments in the debate where you thought, okay, now people see the Kamala I see?
Well, I have to say that I know her as a Californian. I covered her in California as Attorney General and certainly helped cover her U.S. Senate race. And the Kamala Harris, who was described in certainly her first year as vice president, was all but unrecognizable to me. I mean, it didn't ring true. Yeah. And so, whether you agree with her politics or you don't agree with her politics, and I'm there, I agree some and don't agree with others. She's a very good performer. She's really good. And I was a panelist at her first debate her only debate for Attorney General against a guy who was far more experienced than she was, Steve Cooley, who was a district attorney of Los Angeles County, 40 years in the courtroom, favored to win. She did really well in that debate, and one of his answers was actually the reason why he, I think, lost that election. And then I covered her debate in 2016 when she was running for the U.S. Senate, and the facial expressions that she was so noted for in the debate on Tuesday night. I mean, she did the exact same thing in 2010 and 2016. I mean, she's somebody whose body language speaks volumes.
Mm. It's as if she expresses her feelings or her ideas with her whole body, doesn't she? And the warmth. Dan, I have a quick question for you, which is, Trump was saying for a long time, she's an idiot. She can't put two sentences together. She can't handle a debate. I was trying to figure out why he was saying that. And what I heard the other day was that because she stumbled in that interview at the beginning of her vice presidency and kept a low profile, that the right wing did what they call supercuts. Every time she talked to anyone, they would kind of cut it up to make her look incoherent. And that was fed to Trump. So he had no idea that she was going to emerge with such eloquence, such spontaneity, and able to improvise. Does that sound right to you? Did you see something like that?
When he called her dumb as a rock, I thought, boy, you're really underestimating this person. Right? I mean, you can say a lot of things about Kamala Harris. Dumb she is not. This is a very smart woman. And she's really quick on her feet. He obviously did not do his homework. He didn't spend any time watching her past debate performance. Maybe he watched the Mike Pence debate, but he didn't watch her debates against Steve Cooley or Loretta Sanchez when she ran for U.S. Senate. She was the person who I saw in California, only better. I mean, she was clearly better. This was a world-class debate performance.
Yes,
her first answer was shaky, but after that, she was on a roll and really, just trounced him.
I agree. One of the big issues in this election is immigration. And I really think that Kamala is really an advertisement for the positive aspects of American immigration. Could you say a little bit about her mother and the influence her mother had on her, and how we may be seeing some of Kamala's mother in what we're seeing now?
Sure. Well, so first of all, I never met Kamala Harris, but I certainly know people who knew her. She died in 2009. Think about this woman. She was 19 years old, living in India, and she got it in her head that really what she needed to do was to go to the University of California at Berkeley, half a world away, in 1958. 19 years old, 1958. And this is a diminutive woman. She stood 5 feet tall, right? I mean, what guts? Yeah. What guts? And she becomes a cancer researcher of some renown, and her father is an immigrant from Jamaica, Black immigrant from Jamaica. They met at UC Berkeley, so these are both immigrants who come to this country to better themselves. And how do you better yourself in California? Well, you go to University of California, any one of the campuses, but certainly Berkeley at that time was head and shoulders the best. And so they go to Berkeley. He becomes a tenured professor across the bay at Stanford in economics. You know, it's so funny. Trump calls him a Marxist. I don't know. He did teach Marxism. He was clearly one of the farthest to the left in that economics department. You know, but he taught at Stanford, which is a pretty, I think, mainstream university. You know, I mean, we're not talking crazy here. Anyway, the reality is this is a woman who was primarily raised by her mother. They divorced when 1972, split before that, but divorced in 1972. Kamala Harris was born in 1964, so 8 years old. Her younger sister, 2 years younger, Maya. They are primarily raised by her mother. Her mother got passed over for a job at Berkeley, and rather than sit around and brood, and I think this is so important, she scooped up her 2 children. She got a job at McGill University, not a bad place to teach, and went off to McGill University in Quebec with 2 daughters. Kamala was 12 at that time. Maya was 10. That too takes a huge amount of guts and gumption. When Kamala Harris talks about, and I don't profess to know Kamala Harris really all that well. I mean, I certainly have interviewed her. I've covered her races. She didn't talk to me for Kamala's way at all. But when she talks about how her mother showed her the way, that her mother, no doubt was discriminated against. She had an accent. She was her skin color was brown. No doubt she was discriminated against, and that was not an excuse as far as Kamala Harris was concerned. So I think her daughters embody that. Sure, people may prejudge you, and they certainly will underestimate you, and you just show them who you are. And I think that's kind of what Kamala Harris has done. When I was at the Sacramento Bee editorial page editor, and before that deputy editorial page editor, she came in for endorsements, and she would come in with an aide, but it's not as if she turned to that aide for answers. I mean, she was adept. She had done her homework. She answered every question except for those she chose not to answer, and you could ask her 10 different ways, and she would say, no, I'm not going to answer that 10 different ways. So there's a tough, smart, accomplished woman that Trump would call her dumb as a rock. Really says more about him than it does about her.
It's so vile that but again, the quality of his lying has declined so much. John and I were talking about it before you came on. The way that he attacked her was just, it meant he was going to be shown up. Another question I have for you, What happened in her relationship with her father? Did she stay in touch with him over these years?
Question.
So that's such an interesting question, and I do not know the answer to that. You can see evidence of it though throughout her adult life. She talks a lot about her mother. She talks very little about her father. I counted up the number of times she mentioned him in her autobiography, The Truths We Tell, and it was like on 5 pages, and her mother is throughout that book. There was a biography, probably still is up on the California Department of Justice website, that includes biographies of past attorneys general, and hers is there. And she talks about her mother, doesn't mention her father. Now, she has said that the only quote, and again, if I had a half hour to sit down to talk with her, if I had 10 minutes to sit down and talk with her, the first 10 questions would all be about her relationship with her father. I mean, I find it so interesting that we know so little about him. He's still alive. I've sent him emails. He hasn't responded. I think I have his correct email address. So we just don't know. And, I mean, I'm a father, 2 daughters and a son. And I can't, I mean, the notion that, her inauguration in 2021, you could see the photo. I wasn't there, I was in California. But you can see the photos, and you see Biden's beautiful family, and you see Harris's beautiful family, and her husband and her niece and her sister and her niece's daughters and her niece's daughters, or her niece's husband, and nowhere to be seen is Donald Harris, her father. I was at the convention in Chicago, and specifically hoping to see if Donald Harris was going to show up. And as near as I can tell, he did not. So, and again, on the stage, after she accepted the nomination, as the balloons were falling, there was her whole family and her husband's whole family, and Tim Waltz's family, and Tim Waltz, but Donald Harris was not there. So anyway, it's a mystery. Somebody will get to the bottom of it. She'll tell the story at some point, or he'll tell the story at some point, or we'll never know, really.
I don't want to sound like a simple Freudian, but imagine having this political battle against somebody who has your father's name.
Yeah, well, there you go.
I mean,
it is weird.
God has presidents.
Yeah. The only quote I ever saw in which she described him was, I think it was in 2003. I think that was the year. Basically, she said, he's a good guy. We're just not that close. Okay, good guy, not that close. Maybe that's the extent of it. He appeared once in the when she was running for president in 2019. As your listeners may recall, she was asked whether she had ever smoked weed, and she said, "Of course, Jamaican roots." Well, this got under her father's skin, and he accused her of cheap identity politics.
Really? He attacked me with that.
He went after. He
really? I'm sorry to hear that.
His daughter, you bet. But we haven't heard
saying Jamaicans smoke weed, which we know they do.
Well, so
part of their religion.
So do some Americans, I'm told.
I've been told. I don't know. For sure.
One of the very interesting things though about her father, and this is something that I would love to ask him about and her about. So he wrote an essay, really moving essay about his family in Jamaica, and he talks about his grandmother, paternal grandmother, and says that she is a direct descendant Hamilton Brown. Now, Hamilton Brown was had sailed over from Ireland in the 1700s, late 1700s, and became a slaveholder, and not just any slaveholder. This was a guy who truly was a champion and defender of slavery, and as was the case, I have no doubt, but that male slaveholders had sex with their with the people they enslaved, and it was not consensual. Well, okay, so that was certainly what Donald Harris implied in his essay. And so you think about it. So Kamala Harris is the daughter of immigrant from India and an immigrant from Jamaica, and she may have roots that include this horrible slaveholder, and that she's a step away from the White House. I mean, of course, it's a very close race. We have no idea how it's going to turn out. But can you imagine that? A descendant of a slaveholder in the White House of the United States of America. I think that's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Again, we can't know that without a DNA test. I mean, family stories are one thing. Science.
Sort of a Sally Hemings kind of situation in a way. Most likely, you've convinced me. One of the things I mentioned in a prior show is my mother was one of the founders of the National Organization of Women, and back in the 70s in New York, which is where it started. And her greatest wish was to live to see a female president. And she didn't get her wish. She's deceased. But I think of her often during Kamala's campaign. And I think about this as being almost more in a Jungian way, archetypal, that this is, the feminine energy of the universe, or this is, the women in some larger sense writ large, claiming their power and claiming their place and making their. And one of the things that struck me in your book that stuck with me is when you said that Kamala's mother gave all of her daughters the names of Hindu goddesses because she thought that makes powerful women. And I liked that. That was because that has a Jungian flavor to me. Embody the archetype, channel the archetype. Embrace the archetype. Be Kali. And be the goddess of war. So I like that.
Right. Well, of course, Kamala is, I guess the Sanskrit translation is lotus flower, and so that has great meaning and as well, and it's described as a flower representative of joy in part. Well, that's kind of one of the sub themes of her her and Tim Walz's campaign, that they're they're clearly warriors here. They're clearly Kali, who's got a necklace of skulls.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking of.
Right, but she's also a mother figure, and so clearly Walz and Harris and Walz are warriors here, but they're also having a good time. I mean, you look at Walz and Harris on the stage, as I did down in Las Vegas last month, and there's a chemistry there. I mean, they're having a good time. They're playing off one another, and the videos that they're making great use of social media, TikTok, which is where so many people get their news these days.
Absolutely.
But they're
sometimes narrated by
their
Pat,
banter is joyful and cute and funny, and it's a buddy movie. It's a Hollywood buddy movie.
Yeah. And Dan, she chose him because of that energy, that
I think
chemistry.
so.
I do too.
I think so.
I think she was looking for that. She really understands that there has to be an authentic interchange for people to really pay attention. They have to feel it. Yeah. Well,
I find it, she's clearly a lawyer. You could see that certainly at the debate. A lawyer who spent time in a courtroom and knows how to prosecute a case. And he's a school teacher, and having the product of public schools. My children are the product of public schools. My grandchildren all go into public schools. I like that I like that he's a former school teacher.
Me too. Me too.
Dan, is there anything that the public doesn't get about Kamala? That as a biographer, you feel like there's just something they're not understanding or not seeing clearly.
Yeah. Well, again, she is smart, accomplished, a very skilled politician, and having covered politics for more than 4 decades. Whether you agree with one's politics or not, just sort of as a theater reviewer, the theater of politics, you have to appreciate a really good performer. And in that sense, I think Trump is a very good performer. He was better a few years ago than he is now.
I used to be.
His shtick is kind of wearing a bit thin, but he still appeals. Obviously, he appeals to 47% of the population. One of the things that I found that I was surprised about was, this tough, accomplished prosecutor also has I shouldn't be surprised, but she has a heart, right? And so one of the things that I ran across in sort of my first interviews was people who, when the cameras weren't on, she made a point of talking to them. People who were at death's door. The first one I ran across. Well, actually, not the first, but one of the ones I ran across. One where it really clicked for me that this is an interesting thread. Was there's a lawyer. She was DA in San Francisco. There was a lawyer who knew her and was aware that there was a woman, political activist, not a name that anybody other than another political activist would know or a candidate would know, who was dying at the city nursing home, Laguna Honda. And this lawyer told Harris, it'd be really nice if you would write her a note. And Harris said, well, what are you doing now? Let's go over there. And so as I recall, it was a rainy evening in San Francisco. They drive over to Laguna Honda, and she spends 20 minutes holding this woman's hand. Well, that's, to me, that's something where you just you go out of your way to say goodbye to somebody. I think that's quite nice and thoughtful. And it's not as if this was going to get her a vote, and there was no camera on when this happened, right? It's kind of interesting. I talked to her first campaign manager, who's out. I mean, she's still very politically active, but anyway, we spoke at. We got together and talked about Kamala Harris. I'll try to write a piece before November 5th about it. But a woman named Rebecca Prozan, who was her campaign manager when she ran for district attorney in 2003. And so, Kamala Harris was a long shot. She wasn't going to win. She started with 6 or 8% in the polls, and she was running against 2 people who, one who was a very famous name in San Francisco, Hallinan, and one who had run 2 or 3 times before, Bill Fazio. And anyway, Rebecca told me that a year ago, after her mother died, Vice President Harris picked up the phone, gave her a call, and said, I'm so sorry to hear about your mom. Well, that's, I don't know, vice presidents, they say they don't have much to do. I don't believe it. Especially this vice president. I think she had a lot to do. But she took the time to pick up the phone and call Rebecca.
Well, that's really good to know. I'm glad you shared that with us. I'm glad that the people in our audience were able to hear that about Kamala, because we sense her humanity and her joy, as well as her strength and her warrior-esque quality. But I think that one of the things that Harry and I have been talking about is, look, there's something genuine here. There's a good person here. There's real joy here. There's a real connection between her and Tim Walz. In other words, it's It's important to be performative, but it's also genuine. To be honest, this sounds a lot to me like stories I've heard about people with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton has, constantly, he shows up at every funeral. No one can die in Arkansas without getting their loved ones getting a phone call from Bill Clinton. And like you said, this is not on TV. There's no, yes, there could be maybe some political benefit, but it's real, it's sincere. And he's also a performer. It's both. He can performatively also display his genuine affection and attachment to people.
Well, she a good lawyer is a performer, right? I mean, you see covered a fair number of trials in my day as a journalist at the LA Times, and the best lawyers before a jury, they're likable. The juries like them. There's a rapport that gets built up, and some of that's performative, of course, but it's also and the really good ones, it's also authentic, and. We voters are her jury this time, and so she's certainly got to perform a little bit to show us who she is. But but at least this time, I mean, I didn't cover her ill-fated campaign in 2019. I'm told, I reconstructed it as best I could for the biography, but she was playing not who she was, right? She is a prosecutor. She spent a lot of time in courtrooms, and she put a lot of people in jail who had committed bad acts for long periods of time. And that's who she was. And she was running against that in 2019. It was a blunder on her part. I mean, she probably wouldn't have won in that particular primary anyway. But this time she is fully embracing having been a prosecutor, and it's smart, obviously, because she is the prosecutor running against the felon. But a good trial attorney, you're right, has to be a performer, and on some level, you have to be prepared. You have to have facts. You have to be able to argue the law, but you also have to perform, and so she's kind of doing so far all of the above. It seems, July 27th. Think of that. July 27th is when Biden dropped out. Is that the day, or is it July 21st? Anyway, and so here we are. 6 weeks later. I don't think there's been a flaw. I mean, if there has been, it certainly hasn't been.
We've been saying the same thing. We keep waiting for a mistake. I just have to say that I always sensed that she was running against who she was in 2019. And it really goes back to that idea that timing is so important, because this is the exact right moment for her as a prosecutor against someone she can prosecute. It's the right moment. And also, there's a certain wisdom that she's gathered, I guess, from being vice president for 4 years. One way in which I think about psychological health, and I talk about this on the show, which is that the ability to learn from experience is actually a sign of psychological health. And I think she has learned from experience.
Sure. Well, I've written a new epilogue for the book. It's going to be reissued sometime soon, before November 5th. So obviously I don't know how it's going to turn out. But one of the things that I found in my reporting on this, and again, the Kamala Harris who I saw described in 2021, her first year, was not the Kamala Harris who I recognized. What I've seen, but what I found in my reporting is that although she was, most vice presidents get very little attention, and she was not an exception. I mean, Biden was the boss. Biden is the boss, still the boss. But she benefited from being from I think a mentor-mentee relationship. Who knows? One person described it as maybe a little bit of a father-daughter type relationship. Maybe, roughly the right age, I suppose. But certainly mentor-mentee, and she helped him too. She was in the room when he met these foreign leaders. She learned from somebody who had spent his whole career, much of his career anyway, focused on foreign policy. So I think that in 4 years she has learned a lot about foreign policy. I should say that back in 2016, when she might have been even 2015, she had announced that she was running for the U.S. Senate right after she won her second term as California Attorney General, which annoyed me, but oh well, that's history. But we were trying. We reporters. I was a columnist then, an editorial page editor. We're trying to nail her down on some fundamental policy issues. California is a big state that's got a lot of people, cosmopolitan state, much of it anyway. And we wanted to know what she thought about, I don't know, NATO and Israel and Taiwan. It took us a while to get some of those answers. And I think in retrospect, what was going on was she was studying the issues. I mean, she could go on at length about criminal justice issues. That was her forte. Foreign policy was not something that as a district attorney or as an attorney general. So I think she was taking her time to make sure she understood it. Well, 3.5 years sitting next to Joe Biden, asking questions of people of aides and others who came in to meet him. I think she without a doubt learned a lot.
Just to take what you said, and as a journalist, you're not allowed to speculate psychologically the way that I guess John and I can sometimes. But when you talk about that lack of relationship with her father, and then this relationship with a man who really is old enough to be her father, who really took her in. I don't know if you remember in the when she went to Delaware after she got she grabbed the nomination, and he was on speakerphone and told her he loved her.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
and it's filling out, I think, what happened. That he really did care for her, and he was teaching her during those years.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was struck by in that otherwise not particularly memorable CNN interview, although I did like her line about Trump questioning her racial identity. Good God.
Me too.
Was she went on at some significant length about her thoughts about Joe Biden, and I thought it was really from the heart. I feel as if there's she has a real affection for this guy who it made all the political sense in the world to choose her as his running mate. There was opposition to him choosing her as his running mate from Jill Biden, and yet he did the politically smart thing and chose her. Well, it took a while, I think, for them to really warm up to one another, for Biden and Biden's people to warm up to her, but they really did, and I think they have. I believe it's a genuine relationship, genuine friendship. So it doesn't surprise me that Biden would say, "I love you." Yeah.
And there was Trump on stage telling her that Biden hates her.
Right.
and
to her credit, she did not rise to that bait. She did not take that bait. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas he took. I mean, he was swallowing it hook, line, and sinker whenever she tossed another worm out there for her.
No, she set the bait. She never took it.
Yeah.
Well put. Touche.
Yeah.
Well, Harry, do you have any other questions for Dan?
I don't, but what a pleasure to have you on, Dan.
Yes.
What a wonderful conversation.
Delightful.
You were right. Timing is everything, and you were the right person at the right time to be here tonight.
Yeah. Well, in her time, I'm not sure she would be here if she had to run in a competitive primary. But one should never discount the power of luck and timing.
Yes.
Or the power of Hindu goddesses.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and it's not if you ever meet Kali.
Exactly. Look out.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, Dan. Good luck with your
so much, Dan.
All right.
the book.
Hey, thank you.
Bye. Well, what a week, huh?
What a week.
Wow.
And what a great guest.
Yeah, I'm really glad we were lucky.
Boy, what a thoughtful, old school journalist. I mean, someone who really builds his understanding and can express himself with subtlety and nuance. Is really very cool.
Well, Harry, so we're up to the shrink wrap section of our show. What did we learn this week?
Well, as usual, I always say we learned so much, but I had a little lesson that I wanted to present to everyone. It's a matter of history. And I first, Rex, if you could just show that photo of the handshake again. That wonderful handshake, as John described, Kamala Harris establishing dominance. There is a wonderful documentary from American Masters about Lena Horne. And if any of you don't know who Lena Horne is, please look her up on Google or on Spotify and listen to her extraordinary music. She was a great singer. She came out of Brooklyn from one of those rare upper middle class black families in Brooklyn. She was one of the Horns. And because she was so beautiful and so talented, there's footage of her throughout her life. First dancing in the Cotton Club with Duke Ellington. And then she was brought out to Hollywood to break the color barrier. They brought her out and they didn't break the color barrier with her. They just had her sing songs in movies. It was terrible for her. And she eventually came back to New York. And before the civil rights movement, she was always the first. And so one thing that was extraordinary about her life, always being the first, was this moment when on a TV show in the 50s, she met Gary Cooper, who was a huge movie star at the time. And you'll see what happens in this short clip.
The TV racial codes were really bizarre.
Thank you.
This was a no-no that a white person and a black person never touched on television, especially if they were of opposite sexes.
It's extraordinary that just a handshake with a black woman would be such a barrier-breaking event.
I always try to remind my students and myself, even though there's so much work to be done around racism and paranoia, that the world has changed so much in the past 80 years, thank goodness. And thanks to people like Lena Horne, who she is just extraordinary, and Kamala. But this time, the bookend of these handshakes is that for Lena Horne, she was treated with respect by Gary Cooper on television. And with Kamala, she was establishing her power and taking her stand for the handshake. And look how much has happened between the first handshake and the second.
We've come a long way, baby. Most of you are too young to remember that ad anyway. But that was an ad for Virginia Slims in the 1970s.
Well, John, any other thoughts you have about the show today?
Well, like I started, victory, victory, victory. I smell victory in the air. It is so sweet. I am so excited. But Harry, I realize sometimes maybe I get a little overexcited, and I felt like I felt like I needed to confess this, to you on the show. I'm talking to my analyst, Dr. Freudenberg, and luckily he's a fan of the show. And he said to me that you really should listen more to Harry. He's a little more mature, more measured, more thoughtful. You don't have to act out every impulse and express every thought and blurt out your interruptions and your laughter, and you really so maybe I owe you a little apology. I don't know.
Are you apologizing for the dancing at the end last week?
Maybe.
John, I really appreciate that, because I really was kind of hard on you, and I accused you of having no shame. And I have to be honest with you, I spoke to my analyst.
Oh.
And my analyst is not Dr. What was your Dr.
Freudberg?
The guy who clicks his teeth. My analyst just goes by Jack. And Jack is, he'll sometimes, when we start a session, he'll say, "Hey, Guy, how are you?" And what Jack said to me was, he said, "Why were you being so tough on John at the end of that last show? What's wrong with dancing?" He said, "It's almost as if you were trying to control your own wish to be playful, your own wish to dance and be powerful, and you were controlling it in John instead of being interested and respecting who John is." And if John expresses the exuberant, youthful quality which you see in every two-man team, maybe I shouldn't be trying to play the grown-up who says no. So in light of that, John, and with my apologies, hit it, Rex.
I'm a never Trump guy.
Yes!
I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy.
See you next week, folks. Thanks for coming by.
I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I'm a never Trump guy. 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 I'm a never Trump guy.